All right, we will begin this chapter with a different way that economic growth can be measured, right? And also the reason why economic growth is desirable. We will look at the difference in economic growth across our country and also look at the variable that lead to that vary growth, that different growth across the globe. We can see throughout the chapter that the standard of living across the globe can be quite different, right? And a country is not always destined to have a higher or lower standard of living. We'll bring back the concept of a production possibility curve, right, to illustrate the demand factor, supply factor, and also a efficiency factor that contribute to economic growth. We're also going to look at some variable that lead to productivity growth, especially labor productivity growth across the globe, and also if the economic growth can be sustained due to the scarce resources that we have. So the content of the chapter, we're going to cover economic growth. We will discuss about modern economic growth, the determinant of growth, what accounts for growth, and also recent fluctuation in average rate of productivity growth. And the question to answer at the end will be if a growth is desirable and can be sustained. So economic define and measure economic growth in two different ways. The first way is to look at the increase in real GDP over some time period and compare that real GDP. The second way to look at it is through the real GDP per capita. Real GDP per capita, you just take the real GDP and divide it by the population number over some time period, right? Because the GDP per capita ultimately lead to the standard of living in the country. So the growth is expressed in percentage, and we look at it either quarterly or annually. During a period of a recession, the growth rate can be negative instead of positive. Right. The second measure, when we talk about the GDP per capita, you can look at that if you try to compare economy of a different size, right? You want to bring the real GDP to the head count to be able to make that determination if you want to look at the economy, country of a different size. Okay, but the real GDP is good when you just look at it. When you try to look at country to country comparison, real GDP is the best tool. It's most useful to do that comparison. But if you want to look at a country of a different size, it's always good to bring the GDP back to the population, what we call GDP per capita. Also have the rule of 70 here. And the rule of 70 just help you to determine knowing the growth rate. If you know the growth rate, the annual growth rate, you can use this rule of 70 by taking 7 divided by the growth rate to come up with an estimate number. It will take the country to double that real GDP. Okay, so the rule of 70 just help you knowing the annual growth rate. If you take 70 divided by the annual growth rate, it will give you approximately how long it will take that particular economy to double the real output. So here in the United States, so while you see both real GDP and GDP per capita have increased over the last 60 years and so, you can look at it in different way, right? Because again, the number do not fully account for improvement, like we said before, improvement in product, things such as quality improvement, for instance, that the economists cannot assess objectively the impact of quality improvement, since the GDP is more quantitative. Okay, so this gave you the increase, real GDP increase between this time frame, and also the real GDP per capita in the same time frame. One thing to notice here is that the real GDP increased more than the GDP per capita because of the population also increase. Again, added leisure and improve product quality, I think that is not included in GDP. So to that point, you will see that the GDP may be understated because of the added leisure, what we enjoy, and also improvement in product quality are now adding to the GDP. Okay, so GDP also fell to account for any environment, right? Anything related to our environment or quality of life impact, right? The impact of the GDP on environment also is not included in the GDP, because those again are more subjective and qualitative. So it's hard to quantify those impact. So this table here represents the growth in real GDP and real GDP per capita in the United States since 1950. You can see that due to the population increase, the real GDP per capita has increased at a slower pace if you compare it to real GDP, right? If you compare it to real GDP, you see that the increase is a little bit lower. So modern economic growth. So one thing to keep in mind, prior to Industrial Revolution, the living standard were basically stagnant. What I mean by that is country or economy from year to year, they produce more. They eventually produce more. They produce more output. Year one, they produce, like for instance, year one, a country produce output worth $1,000, and 1,000 people live in that country. So if you look at the output per capita, it's 1,000 divided by 1,000, which is $1. So in year two, for instance, the country will make all the effort to produce $2,000 of output. But if the population also grow at the same rate, now from 1,000 individuals, now we have 2,000 individuals. So if you divide the output 2,000 by 2,000, you will see that the GDP per capita didn't change at all. So that's a scenario before industrial revolution in most of the economy, because the growth of the population is the population grow at the same pace as the output produced. And what we know during Industrial Revolution, when the Industrial Revolution kicked in late 1700, there's a lot of technology, innovation idea, and techniques that help to mass produce. So to that point, we see a speed up in the output produced compared to the increase in the population. So that we start seeing the increases in the standard of living of those countries that experience industrial revolution, because they found a way to produce faster, increase the productivity, while the population increase slower. To that point, the output produced per individual, output produced per capita, or GDP per capita, start increasing. And ultimately we see increases in standard of living of those economies. Countries experiencing economic growth have tended to move toward a democratic form of a government, right? And what also we see is people's life span have doubled, right? And original people, average people, have been able to experience a leisure time, work less, enjoy all, right? And due to increase in wealth, and also translate to increase in living standards. So here, a little historical on the modern economic growth, right? I start with Britain and a slow spread out throughout the Western European country, Canada, United States, and most of Asian countries they are not experience industrial revolution until early 1900, right? And recently, few decades ago, we see that countries in Africa have begun to see modern economic growth. So, and all those, the time each country started, that's what we see today in the discrepancy or the gap between the living standard of those countries. People who started countries that started earlier, you see that they improved their standard of living compared to country that started at a later stage. So, but here, one thing we need to keep in mind, a little country, right, invent technology, started early, enjoy, improve standard of living today. The follower country just need to adapt those technologies that were invented before to be able to grow faster and catch up. So today, the opportunity resides in those who follow our country, but they will need to copy. They must copy those technological advances that were pioneered by the leader country and set up those institutions that favor growth so that they can catch up, right? They can close the gap in standard of living. The graph that I'm showing you here illustrates a large discrepancy in the standard of living across nations, right? So you can see here that people that experienced it earlier, like the United States, some Western European country, you can see that the standard of living start increasing faster than the country that experienced it later, at a later stage, like some Asian country and Africa. Right. So again, there's opportunity for the country that start the industrial revolution at a later stage to close the gap. We will need to adapt to those technology to their reality, and also make sure that they create a platform that favor or strong institution that favor growth. Institution and platform that favor growth, there are several structures that promote and sustain modern economic growth. First one is a strong property right. It's very important, right? Because people will not invest if they believe that the investment are not safe, right, from theft, or somebody come to them and take their private property away. So government had to set up those institutions that protect property right, patent, copyright, right? So if an individual invests time and money to come up with technology, they need to make sure that they enjoy the fruit of that product, right? You think about it, if you invest in something, your outcome or your desire is to be able to enjoy the outcome of that investment. So government need to set up again a platform or a system when those people who are going to invest will know that, well, if I come up with a product, I will be able to enjoy the fruit of that product. So patent and copyright are very important, right? If a society want a constant flow of innovative idea, new technology, and sophisticated tools. Efficient financial institution is another one also, right? You need to make sure that when you put the money in the financial system, those money are secure, right? Out of any political crisis or any social crisis that may happen in the country. Literacy, widespread of education, free trade, and a competitive market system. The other factor that ensure that a nation ability to promote and sustain economic growth. There are 4 supply factor or supply determiner related to economic growth. For the economy to grow, we need to have an increase in quantity and quality of natural resources, right? Also increase in quality and quantity of human resources. I need to make sure that widespread education, people are talented so that they can, that will impact their productivity. We have also the increase in the supply of capital goods and improvement in technology. Any increase or improvement in one of these factors will ultimately increase the potential size of the output produced, right? There are other factors, determinant of growth. Beside the supply factor, we have the demand factor and efficiency factor. So we have 4 for supply. The 5th one here is the demand factor, right? To achieve a higher production, right, created by the supply factor. We also must make sure the households, businesses, and government also purchase the product, right, that were produced using the supply factor. So it's very important that the goods produced were purchased so that business can keep producing. So the 5th factor is the demand factor that will help to expand the economy. And the 6th factor, the efficiency factor, is important as well because it helps to achieve economic efficiency and the full employment. Efficiency here is use the resources in a least cost way, find a technology to use those resources at least cost way, and also produce the mix of goods and services that the society value the most, that maximize the society well-being. So this production, we say we're gonna make some illustration of production possibility curve. So economic growth is made possible by the 4 supply factor that we already alluded to. And that shifts the production possibility curve out. It shifts it outboard. So you can see the shift, outward shift or the production possibility curve, originally the fade one, and those of supply factor that we alluded to earlier will have to produce more by shift. And you see the shift over here in the production possibility curve from AB now to C, D. And here, economic growth is realized when the demand factor and efficiency factor move the economy from right, A, C, inside the production possibility curve, right, to a B, which is on the new production possibility curve. Right. And the C here will represent a situation in which output fell below what it should be when an economy is producing at a full potential, right? If economy is producing at full potential, we be on B. The C here represent a situation when we produce below the full employment. And that's the example of what happened during the severe recession of 2007, 2009. So there's a way society can improve its real output and income, right? One of the way it will be to increase its input of resources, right? You increase the input of resources. If the productivity is the hour use time, the productivity, if you increase the hour use, which is the input of resources, the labor, for instance, for the hour use, right? Or you can raise the productivity, right? Like technology or anything related to technology, right? The productivity, you have a technological advances, right? Quantity in the capital or training and education, all those things rolling into the productivity increase, and the size or the improve in the input resources are all the hours that we use. So okay. So by looking at this number here, it is clear that both increase in the quantity of labor and increase in productivity are very important source of economic growth. So you can see that between 1953 and 2018, the labor force has increased from 63 to 163 billion workers, and the productivity growth has also been a more significant factor, right? So if you look at it here, you compare the number, you see that the increase in real GDP due to the increase in labor quantity and the labor productivity, which is driven by education, technological advances, and other things that will help to increase the productivity. So there are 5 different factors that, when combined, appear to explain change in productivity growth rate. Right. So the largest contributor is the technological advances that account for nearly 40% of productivity growth, right? And technological advances is generated by discovery of new technology, and so and so. The quantity of capital explaining roughly by 30%. And more and better planned equipment make worker more productive. If they have equipment, sophisticated equipment, they are more productive by using those. So you don't need to use a lot of hours or a lot of effort to be able to deliver a good result. Education, training, economy of a scale, efficient resource allocation, right? Account for the remaining of productivity growth. Investment in human capital, right, like labor and all those things, is a very important factor in increasing labor productivity. So now I will show you this graph over here. I give you a little story. So one of a measure of a nation quality of labor is the level of educational attainment. So this table shows you the large gain in educational attainment over the past several decades. So you can see that in 1960, roughly 44% of U.S. Only 44% of the U.S. population age of 25 and older had at least a high school education, and only 8% had college or post-college education. By the end, or by year 2018, right, those numbers are roughly increased to, you can see that the high school is to nearly 90% here, right? A jump from this level to this level. So if you look at a college grad or more, a jump from near 8%, and now is roughly 35 or even more percent. So this global perspective shows you the test performance of a U.S. 8th grader student. And you can see here that compared to other nations, the U.S. 8th grader didn't do very well, right, in the text, right? If you compare it to in mathematics and science, U.S. didn't do very well. So again, it's a wake-up call to the policymaker to put all the structure or the policy that will help kids to be more into mathematics and science. If you take those two curriculum, or if you take those two classes as the basic curriculum of any technological advances, it's very important that the country that want a better future, better, higher productivity for the future, or higher growth in the future, to invest in math and science. Productivity growth as measured by a change in the index of labor productivity. The growth rate doubled in the period of 1995 to 2010 as compared to 1973 to 1995. And economists argue that the increase to this increase over here is related to a significant wave in new technology coupled by the global competition. The increase in productivity growth is important as real output, real income, and real wages are linked to it. It is the main route of improving the living standard of a nation, right? If you think about it, if you improve your real income, you have that flexibility to purchase more of your basic need so that you consume what you needed to improve your standard of living. You have flexibility, income power to be able to purchase goods and services that will improve your overall satisfaction. So this graph over here reflects the growth in US productivity between 1973 and 2018. Notice that the average productivity was 1.5 until 1995. And after 1995, the average productivity, the growth rate increased to 2.4% and decreased later just to 0.1% per year after the Great Recession of 2007, 2009. So now the question is, why the rise in average productivity growth between 1995 and 2020? So one core element was explaining that rise was the explosion of in entrepreneurship and innovation based on the development of microchips. If you guys recall, in those years, that's where we have that boom in information technology, right? So microchips have found their way into thousands of a product, right? And change the way business was conducted, right? And to the point that 100 of a new startup firm, right, took advantage of that new information technology. And the new firm use the new technology to be able, right, they take advantage of the increase in returns and also the economy of our scales by producing more and reduce the per unit cost. Right, so global competition also helped. And one thing that we noticed between that year also is the collapse of the socialist economics. That was another key factor also that helped in improving the labor productivity growth. So this global perspective just lists the 10 top countries based on the index called Global Competitiveness Index. And the index uses a factor like innovativeness, right? Capability to transfer technology among sectors, efficiency of the financial system use, the rate of investment, and the degree of integration within the rest of the world to come up with this ranking. Now what we see now is after the Great Recession is the slowdown in productivity that economy tried to understand why is driven this slowdown that we are seeing in productivity. Right. So during the past 5 years, that's a trend, and this may due to the fact that the growth we see in 1995, 2010 was just a pure anomaly, right? About the information technology revolution. It's just an anomaly that we see that heavy growth. But along the explanation that economists are putting forward, right? Why there's a drop in the productivity rate? Why explain that slow down in productivity rate? They have several explanations. Put forward several explanations. Right, the first one being that the businesses and household accumulate a higher level of debt, right, prior to the Great Recession. Now they had to pay, they are paying those debts that they accumulated before, so they don't have that cash flow to invest in new technology. Right. Another explanation being, well, there's excess capacity before the Great Recession. And now that they have excess capacity, there's no need to invest in new capital because you have existing capital that you are not using fully. Right. Another thing that we are seeing is that many of a new product that we see today, generative information technology, have been offered free of charge to consumer. So since those that doesn't have those products do not have a price tag, it's so hard for economists or statisticians to be able to add those, account for them accurately in the calculation of a GDP. And finally, also constant that is that the technological progress seem to be at a stall, meaning that the growth will continue to be stagnant until the technology or invention speed up again. Now, is growth desirable or not? So there's a two different view here, the entire growth and the growth view, right? So while most of economists and people agree that economic growth is desirable and sustainable. Not everyone agree with that idea. There are critics who say that industrialization, the growth, come with a consequence. One of them, pollutions, right? Climate change, ozone depletion that we are seeing, and other environmental challenges, right? They also argue that there's a little compelling evidence that show that economic growth has resolved social problems, things such as poverty, right? Homelessness that we see across industrialized nation, right? And discrimination. So growth didn't do anything for those challenges, social challenges that face the majority of the economy today. While people that promote growth, the view that support growth, or argue that growth has led to higher standard of living, right? Higher standard of living. Okay. Okay. This is more in defense to economic growth. It give us the economic growth, give us higher standard of living, right? And also the fact that a higher education increase the productivity, we have that opportunity to increase our recreation time, our leisure time, right? And we enjoy better medical care. Those are the benefits that we see from modern economic growth, right? And they also argue that the concern about depleting environment or the environment challenges that we face today can be dealt with as technology advances. People will find a better way to deal with those environment challenges that face us today. And one example is if you look at the automobile industry, for instance, what we see today is there's a shift toward using manufacturer vehicles that use alternative fuels, right, rather than the limited fossil fuels. So the last one of the chapter just give you interesting topic about American women at the workforce. So the latter half of the 20th century saw injection in the labor force of a greater number of women, right? Today, about 60% of American women work full or part-time, and they make approximately 50% of the overall US workforce. Right? So you see that women have been able to increase their productivity in the workplace by becoming more educated, right, more professionally trained, right? And the statistics show that women in general have earned the majority of bachelor degree in 1982, the majority of master's degree since 1987, and the majority of doctoral degrees since 2008. And the trend continued. So the rise in productivity has translated into increase in wage for women in the workforce, right? On average, the data still show that on average, women still earn less than a man. I think the data show for every dollars men earn, women earn 78 cents for every dollar that